right, good afternoon, y'all.
Good afternoon.
Thank you. I am Kayla J. Smith, hello, and I'm one of the co-planners for this year's conference, here to introduce our next panel. Our next panel is titled Womanism in the Academy, and we chose to include this topic because the epistemology of Black women's lives is critical scholarship for how we further legitimize the complex and resilient narratives and experiences of Black women. Womanism is the reason I chose to attend Divinity School, and it is such a healing force in my life. Our panelists for today is Dr. Monique Moultrie and Dr. Wylin D. Wilson. Dr. Monique Moultrie is currently a visiting associate professor of Women's Studies and African American Religion at Harvard Divinity. She is also an associate professor of religious studies at Georgia State University, where her scholarly pursuits includes projects in sexual ethics, African American religions, and gender and sexuality studies. Her book, Passionate and Pious: Religious Media and Black Women's Sexuality, was published in 2017, and she was the co-editor for A Guide for Women in Religion, Making Your Way from A to Z, the second edition. Her forthcoming research is a book-length study on Black lesbian religious leadership and faith activism. Dr. Moultrie received her PhD from Vanderbilt University, a Master of Theological Studies from Harvard Divinity, and a BA from Duke University. Outside of the university, Dr. Moultrie was a consultant for the National Institutes for Health, the Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, Transgender Religious Archives Network, the Content Development for Columbia University Center on African American Religion, Sexual Politics, and Social Justice, and the Religious Coalition for Reproductive Choices Scholars Group, a group of religious scholars collaborating at the intersection of religion and reproductive justice. Dr. Wylin D. Wilson is currently teaching faculty at Harvard Medical School Center for Bioethics, and she is also a senior fellow at the Harvard Divinity School Center for the Study of World Religions, where she teaches and conducts research at the intersection of bioethics, race, gender, and theology. She earned her PhD in Religious Social Ethics from Emory University, her MS in Agricultural Economics from Cornell University, her MDiv at the Interdenominational Theological Center in Atlanta, and her BS in Agricultural Business from Florida Agricultural and Mechanical University in Tallahassee, Florida. She is a member of the American Academy of Religious Bioethics and Religion Program Unit Steering Committee, and serves on the Mount Auburn Hospital Ethics Committee Committee in Cambridge. Among Dr. Wilson's publications is her book, Economic Ethics in the Black Church. Our moderator for this panel is Najha Zigbi-Johnson. Najha is a second-year Master of Theological Studies candidate at Harvard Divinity with a concentration in African American Studies. Najha received her BA in Comparative Religious Studies from Guilford College in Greensboro, North Carolina, where she was heavily involved in statewide organizing efforts around the movement for Black lives. As a student at HDS, Najha explores themes including womanism, Black cultural production, and radical movement building in the United States. And she is also the founder and leader of the student-led graduate colloquium, Freedom School, a seminar on the theories of practice for Black studies in the United States. Yes. And please help me in welcoming our panelists, and I'll pass it over to you now, Najha. Thank you.
Thank you so much for putting this together, Kayla, Ashley, and Nicole, and everyone who's made this possible. It takes a lot of effort to bring us all here, and this is such an important topic, and we always need to center the work of Black women scholars. This is something that is not given enough attention, and it's so critical, particularly in this political moment. So I'm so grateful to also be here with you both and to learn. And so, yeah, I'd just like to open it up and hear your remarks. We'll have around 12 minutes or so to get deep into the work, and I know that's never enough time, and then we can open it up for discussion. So whoever would like to start, Dr. Moultrie, yes?
I'm going to start.
Yes.
Thank you all for the invitation and for your time and attention. Let's see. So given our theme that we were given, I thought it would be helpful before I give my own trajectory into womanism to give us some contours of the categories of Black feminism and womanism as it relates to religious studies and the Theological Academy. I am seeking to do this because I want us to be talking about apples and apples at the same time, so that when I'm talking about womanism, you know from which strand of womanism I am birthed and I do my scholarship. So let's take as a starting point Black feminist Teresa Hoover, who noted Black women operate in support roles in Black churches, stagnantly remaining, as she says, the backbone of the church, with the emphasis on being kept in the background. Hoover is writing during the second wave of American feminism. She writes this in her essay, Black Women in the Church's Triple Jeopardy, in 1974. And this is at the same time as you see the forming of Feminist Studies, the first journal in women's studies. And she's writing in response to the fact that Black women, especially those who are church-going Black women, are often active participants in churches that devalue or render them invisible. These women often found that the feminist movement and Black theology movements were not as helpful to them because of the narrow structure from feminism on white women's concern and Black theology being written primarily from the focus of Black men. Closely succeeding that is the work of Polly Murray, a lawyer and one of the first women ordained in the Episcopal Church in 1977, who was particularly interested in Black women's theological endeavors. Polly Murray's article, Black Theology and Feminist Theology, A Comparative View, was published in 1978, and it's a direct precursor to womanist theology because she notes the necessity of dialogue between Black and feminist theologies. However, before, she says, such a dialogue can take place, it is necessary to create what she entitles a Black feminist theology. Notable other historical markers are the publication of the Combahee River Collective in 1977, which introduces identity politics as a category, and the idea that society should be reorganized based on the collective needs of the most oppressed. You have the emergence of other second wave Black feminist organizers and writers like Angela Davis, Patricia Hill Collins, Beverly Guy Sheftall, Bell Hooks, Hortense Spillers. And within the Theological Academy, you have the training of Black feminist theologians and ethicists at Union Theological Seminary in New York City, such as Jacqueline Grant and Katie Cannon. This brings us to the emergence of Alice Walker in her seminal text, In Search of Our Mother's Gardens, Womanist Prose, where she offered a four-part definition of womanist that Black female religious scholars found highlighted their feminist concerns without the negative feedback that Black feminists were anti-men. The first Black religious scholar to use the word womanist was Katie Cannon, who did so in her 1985 article, The Emergence of Black Feminist Consciousness, and again in her book-length treatment, Black Womanist Ethics in 1988. Dolores Williams coined womanist theology in her 1987 article, Womanist Theology, Black Women's Voices, becoming a pioneer with her use of Black women's fiction and Black women's lives as a lens for theological reflection. There's a difference here that I'm painting between the Christianity-focused womanist theological framework practiced in the US and the African and Africana womanism discussed in other parts of the globe. Walker womanists, which make up the majority of those in the current Theological or Religious Studies Academy, use the term womanist from an articulation of Black feminism partnered with Black folk expression and metaphor so that they are able to express themselves in culturally familial language. To mention briefly the other non-US types, there's African womanism as proposed by Chinwenwe Ogunyemi, marked by its focus on African politics, class, and its notable rejection of lesbianism, and Africana womanism as presented by Clenora Hudson Weems, who coined her term in 1987, and it is rooted in African culture and struggles of Africana women, notable for its rejection of feminism entirely, as it feels that feminism is an irredeemable project because of its white racist past. There are waves of US-based womanism, just like Black feminism, that we can go through at a later point in the Q&A. But I wanted to give you all this backdrop to give you a sense of how I was trained. So I was trained within US-based womanism, following the direction of first and second generation womanists. Although Black feminist Monica Coleman, who identifies as a philosophical theologian working from a womanist framework, she asserts that when you move into the second wave, you move into subdisciplines that establish womanist normativity. I consider myself a third wave womanist. And third wave womanist religious thought is notable for its focus on ideology, its engagement with the religious lives of women of African descent, it's maintaining a goal of justice, survival, freedom, liberation, and quality of life. It's understanding itself as drawing upon and departing from traditional womanist rhetoric, so the first and second generation. And finally, it's engagement with work and thinkers both inside and outside of Black religious scholarship. Inherently, as womanist ethicist Melanie Harris asserts, the third wave of womanists are known by their religiously pluralistic, diasporic, diverse understandings of the category woman, and an enunciation of sexuality that is present in the scholarship. So I could use my minutes debating who gets to be a womanist: only Black women who are Christian, only cisgender Black women, only cisgender Black Christian women. I'm not gonna do that. Instead, I thought what I would do is talk to you about how all of these categories helped form how and where I entered the field. I brought as my show and tell a little pub. One of my Vanderbilt colleagues has a book out, Jezebel Unhinged, Loosing the Black Female Body in Religion and Culture. And in that text, she posits distinctions between womanist and Black feminist scholars of religion. She herself is a Black feminist scholar of religion, and we were trained at the same time, at the same place, doing drastically different things, but coming to similar conclusions. She presents what she sees as 8 similarities between the two camps that I largely support, but it's to her discrepancies that I want to turn my attention because I think it highlights my own scholarly reach. She provides 5 differences. Womanists are too reliant on fictional texts to interrogate living subjects as Black feminists do. I agree. Black feminists are willing to engage with the messiness and the complexities of Black female reality. I'm on the fence. Black feminists read cultural texts differently. Kind of ambivalent about that. Some Black feminists can be antagonistic towards religion. Absolutely. And here is where we have a bone of contention. She says that Black feminism expands its focus on religion, and the primary understanding of Black feminism as Black feminists don't do religion is just, in fact, incorrect. She says they expand beyond the Black church, beyond the narrow focus on one space as religious. And while I agree with her that that is, in fact, what occurs with Black feminist approaches to religion, I wonder, what do we do when 70% of those who are polled in the African American community still show an allegiance to Christianity? What do we do when we do not take that as a center of our focus on Black thought and Black religious spirituality and Black spiritual practice? We do have notable Black feminists of religion working like Dr. Tracy West, Monica Coleman, Carrie Day, Brittany Cooper, who care deeply about Black women's relationship to Christianity and the Black church, and I've been deeply impacted by their scholarship. They write with a capacious understanding of what's really at stake beyond our identity politics, the work for the people. They write about feminism, womanism divide as of little significance unless it points towards a greater path to liberation. And that's why I claim allegiance with womanist scholarship. In naming womanism as my disciplinary home, I'm not discounting my ties to Black feminism. I'm merely seeking to work towards the path of the most liberation for the subjects I study, Black Christian women. One of Dr. Katie Cannon's chief philosophies for teaching, mentoring, and organizing was to encourage others to do the work your soul must have, which basically was a fierce encouragement to do what is significant for you and your community. So what is your work? What is the work your soul must have? It's a challenge for each of us as womanists because there's so much work needed in our communities. And that's how I made peace with my decision that seemed irrational at the time to pursue a doctorate in ethics and society to study Black women's sexuality. All my life, Black women stay saving me. Partially because the Black women I am responsible to from my rural Virginia church, to the Black women I encountered at the Rape Crisis Center, to the Black women that I worked with at the Center for Aging, each woman poured into me more than I could repay. I was trained by first and second generation womanist ethicist Emily Towns and anthropologist Linda Thomas, who taught me to embrace a research project that engages poor Black women as living human documents worthy of study. And the goal is to use their scholarship, their research, their lives in production with integrity, making every effort to make their lives present through polyvalent voice. I took this to heart in my own projects. And Dr. Thomas especially encouraged this and nurtured this with me as I was working as a doctoral student and in my first job on the market. She suggested that if I was going to go into the field conducting research, so if you're going to go study Black women, you also have to be vulnerable to have your ideas and your project changed by the people you are researching. A womanist has to be within the community. And thus, when I went into the community, my work had to show and reflect their own integrity, their own possibilities. So as a trained academician and committed religious believer, I was clear in my goal of illuminating their experiences while at the same time offering a womanist corrective to some of the harmful rhetoric and actions I saw being given in Black religious spaces. Part of why it was really necessary to do this type of ethnographic work was to not just trust my gut, but to actually hear from others what correctives they deemed necessary. Academic scholarship can be destructive, particularly because it wants to create by deconstructing. I couldn't just remove the influence of the Black church and the messages that were being given and provide nothing in the interim. I wanted to provide an intervention, and I'm certain that others will come to different conclusions, but my goal of meeting what they were telling me was better worded as a dance. I would say, what if we try this? And they would say, nah, that's not gonna fly with my pastor. And I would say, well, what about if we thought about it this way? And they would say, yeah, but maybe if that woman doesn't get to do it. So I had to wrestle with the politics of respectability, the concepts of what type of Black woman, what type of Black lady, that were contrary to my own feminist political leanings. My next project has involved me conducting oral histories with 20 Black lesbian religious leaders from various religious communities, demographics, and levels of leadership. One goal of these interviews was to create a book that focuses on Black lesbian religious leadership and faith activism, and that's why I've been here at Harvard this year. What I'm perhaps more excited about than even the publishing of this book is the publishing of these women's stories, letting their narratives teach others. Immediately, the oral histories, transcripts, and biographical sketches and images that I have gained are visible on the Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, Transgender, Religious, Queer Archives Network, LGBTran for short. And their stories are published in an undemocratic way so that you don't have to wait for some peer review process to tell you if these stories are persuasive or if these stories are convincing. Their stories exist. These women exist. We can learn from their leadership models. And that I'm excited about being a part of. My future public outreach, I plan to do curriculum-based podcasts and curriculum such as, Vacation Bible School lessons, things for Black History Month, things for Women's History Month that are based on these women's lives. In my projects, my goal has been to study Black women as subjects, not objects, because I wanted to tell their stories. My interviews with living women who are the subjects of the research and equal partners in the dissemination allowed me to merge with my activist orientations as its focus. Right now, I'm doing work with womanist reproductive justice activism and my interviews with Black women who are seeking moral validation for their courageous decisions on whether or not to parent have been particularly inspiring. That's where I'm doing a lot of my lobbying work right now currently. And I'm happy to answer in the Q&A questions about other opportunities for scholar activism. But I'll close right now with a quote from my teacher, Dr. Emily Towns, who taught me my first womanist course here at Harvard Divinity School. She was one of the WSRP fellows when I was a student. And she says, "A womanist ethic is never content to merely react to the situation. It seeks to change the situation. Seeking to change the situation, no matter what we call ourselves, is my hope for each of us." Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Moultrie. I first want to say thank you to Nicole, Ashley, Najha. It's so good to be here. Thank you for the invitation to come and just share and have this time of dialogue. It truly is a joy, and especially to share with my sister scholar colleague, Dr. Moultrie, because she may not know this, but I have always, for what, 20 years now, because it's literally been that long. I've always admired her as a scholar and highly respected her as a scholar. So this is pure joy today to be here. And one of the things that I appreciate you saying is when she talked about how when you do go in so I come from a womanist perspective. And so when you do go in to work with communities, the importance of the openness, right? Being open, being vulnerable, and allowing the community to really inform how you do what you do. And that is actually literally why I'm here now, is because of that openness has really, really been a blessing in terms of my scholarship and kind of the path that it has taken. So the way that I started out in terms of my research and my work is when I was a graduate student, I was always interested in the role of the Black church in economic and community development, just because of so much that I saw growing up. I'm from the South, and I had a chance to, I lived in a small town, but I had a chance to go to church, our family church. A lot of times in the country, you'll have family churches. And our family church was out in the Black Belt in Florida, in the rural Black Belt. And so to witness poverty and to see how faith communities had a role to play in helping individuals through that, helping with community and economic development initiatives and all of that, I knew that that was something important that I wanted to, definitely study further and try to help other churches to, move forward in that vein. So I, did my graduate work, and then when I was out working in Tuskegee, Alabama, that was my first faculty appointment, and I was at the National Center for Bioethics there at Tuskegee University, and they had hired me to work with faith communities on issues of economic and community development and other, of course, bioethics issues, right? And so I'm out there and I am totally gung-ho about economic and community development. We got to look at economic ethics, what's going on in terms of economic. I trained as a social scientist, so I was really kind of just focused on that. And as I got out in the communities with African-American women, limited resource farmers, who they established what they called a loosely fitted cooperative amongst themselves to deal with issues of food insecurity. Because this is the Black Belt. It was a stagnant economy, high poverty levels, very limited job opportunities, food insecurity. I mean, you name it. HIV, AIDS, epidemic, all of that is going on and has been going on and still going on. And so learning from these women and being out, which was my favorite part, on the farm, with my hands in the soil, it's beautiful the things that happen when you are just out on the farm. And our conversations, I would always listen to the conversations. And so here my mind is on economic and community development, but everything I was hearing was about health disparities. It was about the women in the community and the men who had diabetes. It was about the obesity epidemic among the youth in the community. It was about, high blood pressure. I mean, I just kept hearing so much about health. And at that time, this was before the healthcare legislation was passed, there was so many issues with lack of access to health care, especially in these rural areas. Now, they still have those issues, but it was even worse then. And so all of this was going on. So I started looking at this saying, oh my goodness, people cannot move toward economic and community development while they're sick. And suffering. These communities are suffering from health disparities. So I really allowed that to help to change the course of how my research has gone, and it's been a beautiful thing. I've really appreciated the community for sharing. They shared a lot of beautiful personal stories. Some of the women, elderly women in these congregations in the rural area, had to choose between getting their prescription filled or getting food that week. And so, of course, the doctors were saying in the area, well, African American patients are just non-compliant. But then I was hearing stories of these women who were like, no, actually, I have to make a choice. Am I going to eat or am I going to take that pill? And you have to take it with food. So all of these, all these things are going on. So I come to my research project through that experience. And so what it did was it let me really explore these issues of bioethics, because I was at the Bioethics Center, and that work there was really a blessing for me, because I came to bioethics not in a way that, most people come because they're, really interested in all of the, technological innovations and this, wonderful research that's going on in terms of genetics, in terms of, reproduction, and all of these wonderful things that are going on that are really exciting in the field of bioethics. But I came to bioethics through the rural Alabama Black Belt, and also through working with some of the descendants of those who were in it's not the Tuskegee syphilis study, that's a misnomer, it's the U.S. Public Health Service syphilis study. So our government was the one that actually did the biomedical violation there. So, so that is how I come to bioethics. I come to it through, vulnerable populations, looking at how vulnerable populations are not just on the margins in our society, but also on the margins in the literature, and in the academy, because, as we study bioethics, as we look at, how we train people in bioethics, it does not include the voices of African American women, Native American men and women and communities who are suffering from the lack of our federal government care of especially those that are still on reservations. And so there are so many voices and there's so many experiences of people who are experiencing health disparities and experiencing the healthcare system from what I call the underside, right? And bioethics is not really dealing with these very important issues of race, gender, class. So it's not dealing with multiple oppressions that affect the lives of so many vulnerable populations. And so mainstream bioethics, I'm glad you went through definitions. I should probably do that. Mainstream bioethics is the application of Western philosophical theory to ethical dilemmas that arise in health, science, medicine, and the environment. And so because it originated, bioethics originated kind of, through Western philosophical theory, you can imagine then why these voices are missing, right? These voices are missing. And so for me, in my research, what's important for me is to basically, this notion of situatedness is extremely important because for me to do bioethics, I do it as a religious scholar. I'm not a bioethicist, right? I'm a religious scholar, and I use that lens to approach these issues of bioethics, particularly because being a womanist, that's very important in my work to actually do this, not just a critique. Yes, we're going to critique bioethics, but also to make a constructive contribution to it. That is what is most important to me, is for womanism. I believe that womanism has definitely so much to contribute to mainstream bioethics, and then also to feminist bioethics, because there is, that's a field, feminist bioethics. And so because I believe that contribution is something that is really significant and it's something that is needed, and I think it's needed especially to help us respond to the Black women's health crisis here in the United States, right? And one of the things that we look at how bioethics has evolved and like I said, it's occurred without substantive attention to issues of race, class, and gender, and multiple oppressions, even heterosexism. We can go down the line. But the field has also, it's foregone really important insights within the prophetic witness and tradition of Black faith communities, right? And these communities, which have been historically centered around the experience of vulnerable populations in the U.S. And so my book project that I'm working on is I'm actually coming up with I'm developing a conceptualization of what I am calling womanist bioethics, because feminist bioethics is wonderful, and it has established itself as a field that has been extremely helpful, and it's been extremely helpful to me within my work and my framework as a womanist, coming from that perspective. However, what is significant is not just the gender analysis, the analysis of gender, but when you look at the Black women's health crisis in the United States and health disparities of women in Black communities, what is really important is to look at the multiple oppressions, to look at not just gender, but race and class, and how all of these layers of these women's experiences come and play out in their lives, and in how they're experiencing the healthcare system in the U.S. And I think that is extremely important. And womanism is what has enabled me to, bridge these ideological and philosophical spaces and talk across these fields, because being on the teaching faculty in the medical school has been really, really exciting, and also challenging, right? Because what I have to do is I'm always kind of translating. And I co-taught a class last semester, and it's a class that they offer in the Masters of Bioethics program, and it's theological and religious perspectives of bioethics. So they have a religious scholar that come in, and then I get to co-teach with a clinician, which is fantastic, because there is a lot of translation that has to go on in that. But one of the things that the students always say is they were saying, this is so important for us to be talking with one another from our different, we have different ideological perspectives. My goodness, we're so different. We think differently about these issues, very important issues, life, death, and reproduction, all these issues. We may think differently, but when it boils down to it, what they always say is that these issues are extremely important to our patients, to patients' families, and even to them. So even though bioethics, as it has developed, is very white, male, from the kind of perspective of wealthier, middle class, upper class, and secular, because even though it may have started with a lot of input from religious perspectives, now it's very much really mainly focused on philosophy and philosophical perspectives, kind of pushing religion to the side. And with the way bioethics has developed, Helen Holmes, who is a feminist scholar, she asked the question, has bioethics abandoned the poor? And I asked the question, as coming from a womanist perspective, has bioethics also abandoned African American women? Has bioethics also abandoned Native American people? We can go down. Has it abandoned rural Americans? So you can kind of go down the list of the various vulnerable populations who are actually being left out of these significant conversations that are going on when it comes to bioethics as a field. So I think my time is up, so I'll stop there.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Moultrie. So I have a couple questions that I'd like to ask you both, and then I'd love to open it up to the audience and engage in a discussion. So the first question I have for the both of you is, what does womanist ethics teach us about Black women's health? And specifically for students, in what ways is the academy sometimes a barrier or conduit to this womanist notion of self-preservation and health?
Okay. Well, all right. Can I go? Okay. So one of the things that I think is really important that womanism does teach about Black women's health is the understanding that our physical health is an indicator, but also a conduit, right, for what is going on kind of around us, the context, the social conditions that are affecting the health, that affects the health of African American women, and that is something that has to be attended to, but then also the emphasis on healing, which is really important, because we can continue to talk about health and healthcare, and we can have policy discussions around access and allocation of resources, but if we don't start really hitting on this notion of healing and what that means for women of color in their communities, and then kind of this notion of dealing with cultural trauma, and how do we then get at that in terms of healing? So if we don't deal with that, I think we're really missing the boat. And so I think that's where the academy can also fall short, is kind of the way that we address these issues, the way that we attack the issues, so to speak, and leaving out so many important variables that I think are important.
To jump in there, I think my wheelhouse is very small. I just deal with sexuality. So I'm going to talk about sexual health. One of the ways in which I've found a womanist approach necessary for helping Black women think about their own sexual health, there was a study done in Atlanta, the CDC-funded study. The researchers were out of Emory School of Public Health. and they partnered with New Birth, which at the time was led by Bishop Eddie Long. And their interest was in providing sexual health education for women at risk for HIV and AIDS. And they did a community partnership where the church community created a board that made decisions alongside the CDC and Emory researchers. And so they did a pre-study, as most social scientific research starts with, and they found that women in this church, New Birth was primarily Black and primarily female. They found a high number of at-risk behaviors in their population. And they set out to create a product that would educate that community. But the church board members believed that while education was important, they could also not advocate for safe sex practices. So they couldn't pass out condoms. They couldn't talk about dental dams. They couldn't talk about ways to protect oneself if you were having multiple sexual relationships, because the church motto is marriage is best and abstinence is best until marriage. And yet the data was there. Yeah. They had the pre-tests where they asked women, how many sexual partners do you have? How many times does your partner use protection? Something like 72% of the women they surveyed were having unsafe sex. Yeah. And yet the church's mandate was we cannot provide them an avenue or an access to protection. And so for me, a womanist lens, a womanist response in that type of health crisis or a health concern does that work with both and. It says, yes, we hear that there's a moral message that you're promoting, but you also hear that there are practices that are going on within your community. So let's talk about what your constituencies need to be whole and be healthy and to be productive members of this congregation. And I think that's what's missing a lot of times in these type of collaborations that happen between health environments and religious environments. The on-the-ground piece, the being rooted and grounded in the experiences of Black women piece is what's missing. And so I think that's one of the things we can offer.
And to follow up with that, I think you made such a good point. One of the things that I was involved in a study where we were looking at health and wellness in the rural Black Belt and among these congregations. And one of the questions, and so I was conducting these interviews, and one of the questions that we asked was, you asked about, how many times has your pastor preached about, and we had a list of things. And one of it was HIV and AIDS and, dealing with sexuality. And it was repeatedly came up 0, 0, 0, 0, 0 throughout the community. And these were various congregations, various denominations. And we also would ask pastors the same thing, do you preach on this? Do you have any kind of seminars on these issues? And the answer was no. And so that is a huge, I think it's a huge problem. And you're right, I think the womanist response is the best because it's realistic. Like if we're really gonna absolutely tackle these issues around health and particularly sexual health and sexuality and all of that, then we really have to get serious in terms of, with the faith communities have to really get serious about being realistic about the tragedy that's going on in the lives of African American women who are absolutely suffering. You're suffering health disparities, so you already may be suffering from the disease, but then on top of that, you don't have good access to health care, and then on top of that, you don't have, the insurance. I mean, there are just layers of suffering, and so one of the things that I think is really important that womanism does also contribute is this critique of our Black faith communities, and the critique of these congregations who are looking at the facts, know the facts, and still saying, well, but we can't deal with that, or we can't support that. And so I think that's something that is really, really important for us to really tackle. Yeah.
The next question I have is connected to the work that you're doing, Ms. Borden and Ms. Lipscomb, and thinking about prisons. And specifically, I'm interested to know what, again, well, I guess to frame it, I'm thinking about bioethics and womanism and womanist ethics as both an epistemological framework to think through these larger issues of prison abolition and racial equity, but also a praxis or practice-based everyday tool and way of knowing and being. And so that's one of the reasons I love womanism. And I'm curious to know, what do you think, or how does bioethics and womanist ethics inform your understanding of prisons, and how may we use both bioethics and womanism as a way to think through specifically the issues that Black women are dealing with in prisons? I'm thinking of Black women being shackled while they're giving birth, and the issues that you were bringing up around real mental health crises, but there's no attention to how do we support people in healing. And what does your work tell us, or give us in terms of an insight in terms of how we can think about this?
Yeah. Go ahead. Okay. So one of the things that has been really important to me, particularly because of just my context, coming from the South and being familiar with and working with folks in the rural Black Belt in the South, the issue of food insecurity is big. And I've been able to really enjoy working with Nicole. She's really been more like a colleague than a student, and it's just been such a joy to work with her, looking at the issue of incarceration of African American women, but then tied into food insecurity, because women, if they're incarcerated, they come out, you have children, and you want to feed your children. But then you have all these barriers and blocks that you have to face once you get out, but you still have to feed these babies. And so looking at these kinds of issues are so important. And one of the things that, because I work with faith communities, one of the things that I was talking with some of the pastors about is, I'll ask them, hey, have you thought about, what to do to tackle the issue of, post-incarceration, women are coming back into the community and they need to feed their babies. And so what happens is a lot of the faith communities, some of them, not a lot, but some of them do have programs that are supposed to help women after incarceration. It's not really dealing with that issue. And so I was like, well, let's just start small. How about just basically kind of partnering with, say, one of your local food pantries or a food bank in the community, such that you can go into the prison before the woman gets out and help make sure that women have the paperwork that's necessary done. I mean, that's something that is really simple that faith communities can do. Just make sure that once they get out, at least that one thing that they don't have to worry about is how to feed those babies. So for me, in terms of my work, that kind of thing is really important, because woman is praxis. It has to be practical, dealing with the real issues that face Black women. And so particularly in terms of incarceration, and given my background in agricultural economics, I truly am a farmer at heart. I kid you not. I love growing things and agriculture. So for me, that's a natural place where I have interest, and that overlaps with this issue of incarceration that I think is important for us to talk about.
So because this is way out my wheelhouse, I'll give some, I guess, philosophical musings. I was cogitating over here trying to think through. I think the quote that I ended with from Dean Towns that talked about womanism as non-reactionary, but as seeking solutions for what's going on in the everyday lives of people, and not just reacting to the oppression that is there, but seeking liberation, is the impetus for the scholarship that I do and for studying the communities that I study. And so I think to address something like prison reform, prison abolition, comes from this framing of how can we not just respond, but how can we seek liberation? And that shift, that pivot, I think is the womanist gift, both to the academy and to political organizing, is to not just deal with this is what is, but to be working towards the world to come simultaneously while reforming what is.
So I have some other questions, but I'd love to hear from y'all. Yes? Do we have, yes, questions. I guess we'll do Mike.
Thank you so much. We come from New York City.
Woo! Yes.
Oh, nice.
So it's very invigorating to be here today. When we're talking about faith communities and what faith communities can do to help women who are coming out of the prisons and so on, and also I'm thinking also of other peoples who might be in the community, such as transgender women who are out on the street very often, these women, and men too, I mean everybody, but how are we going to feed our babies if we have not educated people as to the choices of foods? Okay?
I hear you.
Because this is why we're facing so much obesity in the communities. Okay, when you go to any of the black church communities, okay, you see what I'm speaking about. So this is our responsibility. How do we have a solution for that? So that when they do come out and when they do have the resources to get the foods that they need, that they don't go buying all those chips and all that, that stuff that's unhealthy, that's not going very far away from the agriculture and the farming that I know you studied.
Right.
And so this is critical in our community.
Yeah.
Can we get some suggestions as to how that can happen?
Yeah, I hear you 100%. That was one of the things I really enjoyed working with. There was a Parish Nurses Association down in Tuskegee, and there were African American women who were nurses in their local congregation, and they applied for a grant. And what they wanted to do was, they wanted to do a community garden, and they did it literally, because the one thing we have a whole lot of in the South is a bunch of land, right? So churches are just sitting on just land that they don't use, right? And so they had this big old lot right next door to the church, so they started a community garden. And then what they also did is they had education, because they noticed that after you'd harvest the food, because I was out there, helping harvest and everything. Well, most of the folks that came to get the food were the older people in the congregation. And so what they did was got money so that they could do training for the young people to help, with the obesity issues in the community. And so they started a program where they have young people to come in and they do kind of just education about these foods, because some of the young people were like, well, my mama doesn't know how to cook that. Because now we have a generation of folks that don't know how to cook even the fresh, even if it's fresh, say the collards, sweet potatoes, or whatever, we come out of the garden, don't know how to cook that. Not even mention cooking it in a way that's healthy, right? But just don't know how to cook it, period. And so that was one of the projects that I absolutely enjoyed, working with those nurses, because they really were trying to, that was the best, that they could do as a congregation, well, women in these congregations, trying to get at this epidemic, right, of obesity, particularly among the youth. And it was through that, community garden. And then the women, the Black women farmers, that cooperative that I had a chance to work with, they had their own efforts that they were going through with trying to educate the children. Like, so they were starting with children, right? But there are needs on all these levels. So, yeah.
Can I offer? Am I allowed to?
Yes.
Yes. I'm from Harlem, so I know those people in New York and the Bronx in that area. But I had the amazing chance. Actually, this is who I interviewed for our class. We were doing oral histories on people who exemplify womanist activism and organizing. And someone that one of my mentors, who's based in the South Bronx, her name is Tanya Fields, and she has this amazing organization called the Black Feminist Project, and she works around bringing folks together specifically around issues of food insecurity in the South Bronx. And the South Bronx has like the second highest asthma rate in the whole United States, and there's all of these issues. And and she also has an urban farm called the Black Joy Urban Farm in the South Bronx, and it's free, and community members can go and have their own plot and till their own land. And it really started by it started with a mobile bus that she was able to have, and it started by people bringing I don't exactly remember, but it was both bringing folks up to prisons upstate so they could have visit family members who are currently incarcerated, and then also ensuring that those same families had fresh produce to feed their kids and themselves. And so I think that she's a phenomenal example of someone doing work, bringing in Black women, and not simply around issues of food insecurity, but around issues of sexual violence, around how do you navigate the court systems. And she's just a phenomenal woman, and her name's Tanya Fields. And so that's just one person that came to mind in the New York City area.
And I think Leah Penniman, go ahead.
The Black Feminist Project. Yes. She's so
And if you want to read her wonderful interview, if you go to the Harvard Library, the Andover Theological Library, all of the interviews from my class that people wanted cataloged are present in the library. So if you just put in Tanya Fields or Najha's name, that'll come up.
And Leah Penniman is another one. And then there's another organization, the Black Church Food Security Network, and that's a national organization. So that's a good kind of thing to plug into because it's just a bunch of churches who are interested in these issues, coming together and sharing ideas and working together.
Thank you to both of you. I'm just wondering about one word. It's the word despair. And I would love to hear from both of you, Dr. Wilson and Dr. Moultrie, about where despair comes into your work, specifically around sexuality and certainly around bioethics. How can womanism actually answer despair?
Wow. Big question. So by nature, I'm Eeyore. That's the family joke, my friend's joke. My natural outlook on life is pessimistic. It made me partner well, so I'm partnered with an optimist. So despair is what I live with, and I do understand the need to move beyond despair, though. So in my own scholarship, especially because I deal with Black women's sexuality, there is a long history in womanist thought and womanist writing to deal with sexual violence and sexual pain and the inability to connect body, mind, and spirit sexually because of the legacy of slavery, the legacy of oppression, patriarchy, whatever. And my work doesn't start there. I am anti-starting there, in fact, because I think, one, that work has been done. Two, I think that there is space and there's need to give rise to the voices of those who have been denied joy, who've been denied pleasure, but that's not my work. And partly it's because I live my life primarily from a Eeyore-ish kind of philosophy. So I also don't want to write from that perspective. So for me, my answer to you is to seek out Black joy wherever it can be found. And so I'm a big advocate. The largest section in my book is on sexual pleasure. And the cover of my text is of a partially nude Black woman. And when I take it to churches, I often do book signings and such in churches. The pastor will come with the book sort of like this, like, with the title kind of framing. And I'm real clear that no, if you get me, and I jokingly said this Sunday, a pastor invited me to come do something, and I said, I get invited lots of places first, but I seldom get second invitations. Because when I come, my job is to help your congregation, and primarily your Black women, access sexual pleasure, access the joy in their lives. And often in death-dealing situations, and self-negating environments that we deal with on a day-to-day, the best thing I can do for myself is end the night with a great orgasm. And so I say that often. I talk about the clitoris as one of God's gifts to us. And that's a lot of ness to bring into a religious space. And I'm aware of that. And I say it unabashedly and with joy in my heart. And like, go home tonight, find your clitoris. It is the best gift God can give you. And it brings laughter, but it also is my attempt to bring joy back into spaces where we often can get stagnant and stuck in despair. And so that is what I offer.
I don't offer that. But no, I definitely do appreciate your question, because there's a church that that I've been attending, and actually we're in the middle of a Bible study on incarceration, and we're doing it's a Black theology of abolition, is the name of our Bible study, and it has been phenomenal. Devon Crawford, who's right here at the Kennedy School, has been leading it, and it's been phenomenal. And it's so interesting because where we all start out, as Devon is asking us questions about incarceration and our understanding of, our legacy of enslavement here and the connection between incarceration and system and all that, we always start out from a notion of despair and powerlessness. And so I think what is important about what womanism does offer is this notion of healing and hope and empowerment, so that we can actually get beyond, being stuck there and move forward, so that we can actually do the work that's needed to be done, right? Yeah.
Thank you both for that. Take that joy home. I have a question about, well, I'm going to take it back from the community aspect and how womanism is done in praxis and bring it back to the academy. So my question is, I'm trying to work through it, so excuse me if it's not as clear, but I guess my question is, how do you navigate the academy and understanding its implications in racism and sexism and all of those things? As you said, multiple oppressions. When we think about Black women in the academy doing womanist work, what is your experience, and how can you speak to those of us who hope to one day make their way into the academy in whatever field? That's my question.
So I jokingly, and I hate that this is now being recorded because I'm gonna tell the story anyway. I jokingly say that the Katie Cannon's mandate that you do the work your soul must have means you do it regardless.
Yeah.
And when I started out, part of why I said it was irrational, my decision to go and study ethics and society and do the work that I do is because I purposely went to Vanderbilt to work with my advisor who, I won't say is anti-womanist, but he not on the train riding hard. He's a passenger watching. And so I knew that going in. I wasn't oblivious to his problems that he found methodologically and philosophically with womanism as a discipline. And I decided to go there and write a dissertation, a womanist framed dissertation anyway, largely trained by him. My co-reader was Linda Thomas, because it was essential to me that someone be on my train, that someone find validity in the project.
Yes.
But then what does that mean for my entering into the academy? It means that same, the skill sets that I learned to navigate his antagonism is the same skills that help me and navigate what the academy says. So I am purposely a womanist. I purposely framed that as a part of my project. It was important for me that be on the back jacket of my book, and that, it's a part of my bio, and that it's a keyword search that's associated with me. I put a lot of time and effort into that. But am I cautious about what it's cost me? No, because that's the work I'm called to do.
That's right.
And so at the end of the day, the capitalist enterprise, the empire will stay the empire. We're continually fighting the empire. So you can machinate and torque yourself and contort yourself in ways that will make the academy think you're less threatening, make you seem more of a team player, make you seem more in the camp that it's more comfortable with. But is that the work you must have? Is that extra work? Is that somebody else's work? And because the empire will stay the empire and capitalist structures remain, what do I want my legacy to be? It's not that I helped build the empire, that I made it harder for other students coming along to not see themselves. I want to be free, and I want others to be free.
Yes.
So do the work anyway.
That's right. No, I wholeheartedly agree. And one of the things that I think about a lot of times, African American or people of color in the academy have to do, sometimes you do psychological calisthenics, right? Because you're dealing with so much, because you want to definitely do the work you're called to do. And yes, it's risky, right? And one of the things that for me is important is that the way I teach is informed by womanist pedagogy. And that is a liberationist pedagogy. So looking at thinkers like Paulo Freire and Ira Shore, who talk about what it means to have liberatory kind of education. And so for me, in my class, yes, I come in and I see myself differently. Yes, I may be the professor, and in the traditional way, students come in expecting the traditional, professor is the expert, the illuminator, and so they come to the process almost, just passive, right? Kind of just waiting for me to just, I guess, wave my magic wand and poof, and there you have the illumination, but that's not a liberatory womanist pedagogy. What I do is come in understanding that I'm a co-collaborator in the learning process with a student, and we are both agents in this process. And so therefore, I am learning and being transformed by the experience and facilitating transformation within the students. And that is so important in the teaching process, because as womanism is about, social change. And so how are we going to get there unless students understand within the classroom that they have power, they're empowered, and that they have the power to rethink and recreate their world. And that starts right there with me, right? And so going in, it's a dialogical process, And it's been very interesting to take that process to the medical school, because I had a student who was really not with that, because it's very different the way his training had been, and I remember there was a complaint. I remember one of the students complained about one of the readings that I had assigned, because one of the things that was important for me is to look at vulnerable populations and what is their reality, what is the reality that has been created, in this country for vulnerable populations. So we were looking at, Native Americans, and the federal healthcare system, if you want to call it that, on reservations, and how problematic that was. And so I had used a New York Times article that was dealing with that issue, and the student was like, I can't believe we used a New York Times article, And so for me, though, I'm willing to take the risk of what it means to stay true to the work, right? And to stay true to what I feel called to do. Because within bioethics, I really and truly am serious about including the voices of vulnerable population, including those experiences. And so so sometimes there may not be an academic article, that may be the best thing, or it may be out there that deals with it. So you'll use different sources, and you'll get in trouble for that sometimes, or get a complaint. And then sometimes, I remember one student was complaining about the fact that I was talking about, different ethnicities, and I'm sorry, but I do come from a womanist perspective. So I'm not going to come in and give you bioethics the way you're used to getting it. That is what it is. So yeah, you're right. It's a risk, the way that we decide to do what we do in the academy, it is a risk. And hey, I'm willing to take it. Yeah.
I did, but I didn't quite know how to frame it. I mean, you blew me away when you spoke about sexual pleasure.
Get some.
First, I need to know your book. I mean, coming from a prison, living in the prison for so long, I've never been ashamed to tell my truth, my story. And I just never really had that connection. It's like, Lynette tapped me when you said clitoris. That's one of the hardest words to say. I have a girlfriend, I won't mention her name, but she can't say it, right? We do vagina monologues. I think that would be the question, right?
Oh, yeah.
What do you feel about vagina monologues? Really exposing what happens culturally, what happens in the world to women, and not even being able to say the word, right? Or not even like a woman like me, who I've had a hard time really connecting with my male part of seeing me. It's easier now for me because I'm involved in vagina monologues. One of the vagina monologues talks about being in the mirror and really looking at it,
Yeah.
touching
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
Saying the word was real hard for me. I'm like, you're coming from a perspective of a woman who come from sexual abuse,
Absolutely.
That's real.
right?
That's real.
It was a disconnect.
Yeah.
So do you think that that's a good healing point or good exposure for women coming from that prison perspective, that, or even women not even in the prison, but women that have been sexually molested and disconnected with themselves?
Yeah, for me, whatever helps you remember yourself, put back together the pieces that were taken away, make whole yourself, whatever does that, if that's a vagina monologues, if that's a mirror and some time, if that is touching until you tired, if that is, as my partner jokes, getting alkaline poisoning because of your choice of devices, whatever that is for you, risk it, because part of the womanist definition and part of my own Christian understanding is that I am fearfully and wonderfully made, that I am created divinely, put together work of art. And womanism teaches me to love that body, that broken, that bruised, that disarticulated body, but to bring that body back together and love it to wholeness.
That's right.
So I don't know what that process will look like for various community members. My grandmother is 90 and she raised me. And she had a series of strokes 10 years ago. And after the strokes and physical therapy, we had her do a massage. And that's the weirdest thing for a 90-year-old to imagine doing, is to unrobe for some stranger. And in my rural community, it was some random white girl that she didn't know her people, and she didn't know what her people was gonna say about this girl touching. There were lots of things to overcome there. But for me, it was important for her to do that work because I wanted her to reclaim all of her body.
Wow.
Because her body had gone through a trauma, and parts of her body didn't work like it used to work. And so she had to, it was important for me for her to get to a point where she could reclaim that whole body.
Yes.
And she didn't do it but the one time, and she didn't complain immediately. It comes up like every blue moon. Like, remember that time you took me to that random girl? But it was necessary because I saw an immediate change. She won't link 2 and 2 together. But I saw an immediate change in how even she would hold herself. We would go to church, and because her left side was affected, she would position her body so that that wouldn't be as noticeable. After the massage, she stopped doing that. And so it was important for me to notice however wholeness comes and to take hold of that.
Wow.
Passionate and Pious, Black women's, Passionate and Pious, Religious Media and Black women's sexuality.
We are unfortunately out of time, but can we please give a round of applause for our amazing panelists and moderator? Yes. I don't know about y'all, but that panel was very reaffirming and liberating to me. When I first got up here, I was so nervous, worried about enunciating my words and sounding too Memphis-like, but it's like, be ourselves, be free, and like, we are all ourselves. So thank y'all.